Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it. The evening air was crisp, carrying a slight chill that hinted at the coming winter. As I wandered through the city's bustling streets, the usual cacophony of car horns and distant chatter felt like a background hum, numbing in its familiarity. For most, the city's lights were a beacon of life, but for me, Bryce Collins, they only underscored a hollow existence, a life filled with luxury, but devoid of genuine connection. My wealth afforded me everything, yet the isolation was a constant shadow. As I turned a corner near a quaint, closed bookstore, a small, huddled figure caught my attention. An elderly woman, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, sat on the cold stone steps, clutching the thin blanket around her frail frame. Her eyes were closed, and the lines on her face spoke of hardships and battles fought long ago. There was something about her that stirred a long-dormant compassion within me, a fleeting thought of what it meant to truly live and be seen. I approached cautiously, my footsteps quiet on the pavement. She stirred, her eyes opening to reveal a depth of experience and a hint of curiosity. I hesitated, unsure of how to start this unusual conversation. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, ma'am," I began softly, trying not to startle her. She looked up, meeting my gaze with a steady calmness. "Yes?" Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it that belied her frail appearance. My name is Bryce Collins," I said, feeling a bit awkward. "I couldn't help but notice you here, and I wondered if you might need a warm place to stay tonight. I have a house not far from here, and there's a room if you'd like." She studied me for a moment, her eyes searching mine for sincerity. "That's a generous offer, young man," she replied after a pause. "My name is Flora Curtis. Are you sure? I don't want to impose." Her humility struck me, and I felt a pain of sadness at how the world had likely treated her. "You're not imposing at all," I assured her. "I mean it. You're welcome to stay. It's too cold out here, and you shouldn't have to spend the night on these steps." Flora hesitated, then nodded with a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, Bryce. I haven't had a real roof over my head in a long time. I accept your kindness." As we made our way to my car, a silent understanding passed between us. Two people from vastly different worlds, brought together by an unexpected act of compassion. The drive to my mansion was quiet, punctuated only by the low hum of the heater and the occasional honk of a distant car. Flora gazed out the window, her expression thoughtful, as if lost in memories. When we arrived, the grandeur of the estate stood in stark contrast to the modesty of the woman beside me. I led her inside, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort at the opulence of my home. The foyer, with its high ceilings and gleaming marble floors, seemed almost too extravagant for this simple act of charity. "This way," I said, guiding her down a corridor to the guest wing. I opened the door to a cozy room, warmly lit and furnished with soft, inviting decor. "It's not much," I added, feeling self-conscious, "but it's comfortable." Flora stepped inside, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the space. "Not much," she echoed, a gentle chuckle in her voice. "This is more than I could have dreamed of. It's lovely, Bryce. Thank you." She set her small, worn bag on the bed and turned to me with a serene smile. "You're a kind soul," she said. "Not many would offer such a thing to a stranger. I appreciate it more than words can express." I felt a warmth spread through me, a rare sensation in the midst of my often sterile world. "It's the least I can do," I replied. "Make yourself at home, Flora. If you need anything, just let me know." With a nod, I left her to settle in, closing the door gently behind me. As I walked back through the grand halls of my mansion, a strange sense of fulfillment filled me. For once, my wealth had brought something more meaningful than material comfort. It had offered a chance to make a real difference in someone's life. Little did I know, this small act of kindness would mark the beginning of a profound and transformative journey for both Flora and me. The days that followed Flora's arrival were filled with the gentle rhythm of unexpected companionship. Each morning, as I descended the grand staircase into the sunlit kitchen, I found Flora already awake, brewing a pot of coffee. The aroma mingled with the faint scent of blooming roses from the garden outside, creating a comforting start to the day. One morning, as I entered the kitchen, I found Flora at the window, gazing thoughtfully at the sprawling garden. She turned and smiled, a warmth in her eyes that had become familiar. "Good morning, Bryce," she greeted me, holding out a steaming mug. "You have quite the garden out there. It reminds me of the small patch of earth I once tended." I took the mug gratefully, savoring the rich aroma. "You garden?" I asked, intrigued. It was a simple detail, yet it painted a picture of a life I knew little about. Flora nodded, her expression wistful. "Yes, back when life was simpler," she said, taking a seat at the table. "There was something peaceful about working with the soil, watching things grow. It brought me a sense of purpose." We fell into an easy conversation, her stories weaving a tapestry of a life marked by both beauty and hardship. As the days passed, our discussions ventured beyond gardening. Flora's gentle wisdom and humor brought a lightness to my home, something it had sorely lacked. She spoke of art with a passion that was contagious, her eyes lighting up as she described the texture of a canvas or the stroke of a brush. One afternoon, while we sat on the terrace enjoying the late autumn sun, Flora mentioned her love for painting. "I used to paint," she said, almost as an afterthought, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "It was my escape, a way to capture the world as I saw it." I leaned forward, intrigued. "You were a painter? I had no idea," I replied, genuinely surprised. "Do you still paint?" Flora shook her head, a shadow passing over her face. "No, not for many years. Life got in the way, as it often does. The world isn't always kind to those who dream," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. I felt a pang of empathy. The thought of such a creative spirit being stifled by life's hardships struck a chord in me. "You should paint again," I suggested, the idea forming as I spoke. "I have an art studio here, actually. It hasn't been used in ages, but it's fully equipped. You're welcome to use it if you like." Flora looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of hope. "That's incredibly generous of you, Bryce," she murmured, clearly moved. "But I don't know if I still have it in me." "Art doesn't lead you, Flora," I said, smiling encouragingly. "It's a part of who you are. Maybe you just need a chance to reconnect with it." For a moment, she was silent, contemplating the offer. Then, with a slow nod, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that seemed to erase years of weariness from her face. "Perhaps you're right," she conceded softly. "Maybe it's time to find that part of myself again." As the days continued, Flora began spending more time in the studio. I often found her there, lost in the world of colors and canvases. It was a joy to see her come alive, her passion rekindled with each brushstroke. Our conversations grew deeper, touching on topics I rarely discuss with anyone: fears, regrets, and the search for meaning in life. Flora's insights were profound, her wisdom a balm to my often restless thoughts. One evening, as we sat in the cozy warmth of the library, surrounded by shelves of unread books, Flora turned to me with a curious expression. "You know, Bryce," she said thoughtfully, "for all your wealth and success, there's a sadness about you, like you're searching for something, but you don't know what." Her words startled me with their accuracy. I met her gaze, feeling the weight of her observation. "Maybe I am," I admitted quietly. "I spent so long building walls around myself, chasing after things that don't really matter. But with you here, I've started to realize there's more to life than just existing." Flora nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes it takes a chance encounter to change the course of our lives," she said gently. "Perhaps this is your chance to find what truly makes you happy." In that moment, I knew that Flora was not just a guest in my home, but a friend, a true companion who saw me for who I was, beneath the layers of wealth and isolation. Our friendship was an unexpected gift, a reminder of the simple joys and deeper connections that life could offer. And as Flora rediscovered her love for art, I found myself rediscovering the meaning of genuine companionship. The transformation in Flora was palpable as she embraced the opportunity to paint again. Every morning, she would disappear into the art studio, a space I had once abandoned to dust and silence. Now it was filled with the soft sounds of brushes against canvas, the faint scent of oils and acrylics, and the vibrant energy of creation. One crisp morning, I found Flora standing before an easel, her face illuminated by the soft light streaming through the large windows. The canvas before her was a riot of colors, an abstract landscape that seemed to pulse with life. She didn't notice my presence at first, so engrossed was she in her work. I watched, fascinated, as she added delicate strokes of blue and green, her movements fluid and confident. "Flora," I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, a warm smile spreading across her face as she set down her brush. "Good morning, Bryce," she greeted me, wiping her hands on a paint-stained cloth. "I didn't hear you come in." I walked closer, admiring the painting. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely impressed. "You have a real talent." Flora's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and modesty. "Thank you," she replied, glancing at the canvas. "It's been a long time since I felt this. Alive. There's something magical about creating something out of nothing." I nodded, understanding the sentiment. "It's like you're breathing life into the canvas," I observed. "I can see the passion in every stroke." Flora chuckled softly, a twinkle in her eye. "You're quite the art critic," she teased. "But truly, it's been a gift to reconnect with this part of myself. I had forgotten how much I missed it." As the days passed, Flora's paintings evolved, each piece more expressive and intricate than the last. She seemed to pour her soul into every creation, her brushstrokes telling stories of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. The walls of the studio soon became a gallery of her work, a testament to her journey of rediscovery. One afternoon, while admiring a particularly striking piece, I turned to Flora with an idea that had been brewing in my mind. "Flora," I began, hesitating slightly, "what if we held an exhibition? A way to share your art with the world again?" Flora looked at me, her eyes widening in surprise. "An exhibition?" she echoed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm not sure. It's been so long, Bryce. What if no one likes my work?" I shook my head, determined. "Your art is beautiful, Flora. It deserves to be seen and appreciated," I insisted. "Besides, it's not just about the art. It's about your journey, your story. I think people would be inspired by it." Flora seemed to consider this, her gaze drifting back to her paintings. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice soft but resolute. "You really think people would be interested?" she asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I smiled, nodding. "I do," I affirmed. "And I think it would be a wonderful way to celebrate your return to the art world." After a moment, Flora sighed, a mixture of nerves and excitement crossing her features. "All right," she agreed, a tentative smile forming. "Let's do it. But only if you promise to be there with me." "Of course," I assured her, feeling a sense of anticipation. "We'll make it a night to remember." With Flora's consent, we began planning the exhibition in earnest. I contacted local galleries and reached out to my network to spread the word. Flora, despite her initial reluctance, threw herself into the preparations, selecting the pieces she wanted to showcase and even creating a few new ones. The house buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude I had grown accustomed to. As the day of the exhibition approached, I noticed a change in Flora. She seemed more vibrant, more confident, as if the act of sharing her art had rekindled a long-lost spark within her. It was a joy to witness, and I found myself eagerly looking forward to the event. In those final days leading up to the exhibition, Flora and I shared many quiet moments in the studio, discussing art, life, and everything in between. The bond we had forged was stronger than ever, built on mutual respect and a deep understanding of each other's struggles and triumphs. As the night of the exhibition loomed closer, there was an undeniable buzz of excitement and anticipation in the air. The exhibition night arrived with an air of excitement and nervous energy. Flora's paintings, each a burst of color and emotion, adorned the gallery walls, capturing the essence of her artistic journey. The room buzzed with chatter and admiration as guests mingled, sipping on champagne and marveling at the work before them. Flora, standing beside me, looked radiant yet slightly anxious, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of pride and apprehension. As we circulated through the room, accepting compliments and sharing the stories behind each piece, a familiar voice rang out from behind us. "Flora Curtis, as I live and breathe," the voice said, dripping with an unsettling familiarity. We turned to see a tall, well-dressed man with a sharp smile that didn't reach his eyes. His presence sent a chill through the room, and I felt Flora stiffen beside me. The man's name was John, an old acquaintance from Flora's past, and the sight of him seemed to drag a shadow over the evening's brightness. "John." Flora greeted him, her voice steady but devoid of warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." John's smile widened, though it held no genuine warmth. "How could I miss such a momentous occasion?" he replied, his eyes scanning the paintings with a critical eye. "You've always had a talent, Flora, but I must say, your work has evolved." I sensed an undercurrent in their exchange, something unspoken yet heavy with history. Intrigued but cautious, I watched as Flora's expression hardened. "You say that as if you've seen my work before," she retorted, a hint of defiance in her tone. John chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Oh, I've seen plenty," he replied, his gaze locking onto hers. "But I must admit, this is the first time I've seen you exhibit openly since everything happened." Flora's eyes narrowed, a storm brewing behind them. "I left that life behind," she said, her voice laced with a quiet intensity. "I'm not that person anymore." John raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused. "And yet, here you are, back in the limelight," he remarked, a faint sneer curling his lips. "I wonder, do you still think about him? About Morris?" The mention of Morris sent a palpable tension through Flora, and I felt a protective instinct surge within me. The name alone seemed to hold a weight, a darkness that threatened to overshadow the evening's success. "That's enough, John," I interjected, stepping forward. "This is Flora's night, and she's moved on from the past." John glanced at me, his expression calculating. "Ah, the young millionaire," he said, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Bryce Collins, isn't it? You've taken quite an interest in Flora. I wonder if you know the full story." Flora's hand gripped my arm, a silent plea for support. "Bryce knows everything he needs to," she stated firmly, her voice steady. "And what he doesn't know, he doesn't need to." John's gaze lingered on Flora for a moment longer before he shrugged, as if dismissing the matter entirely. "Very well," he said, his tone casual but insincere. "I suppose the past should stay buried, but if I were you, Flora, I'd be careful. Some things have a way of resurfacing." With that ominous remark, John turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving a cold silence in his wake. I turned to Flora, concern etched on my face. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice gentle. Flora sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "John has always had a talent for stirring up trouble," she admitted, her eyes distant, and mentioning Morris. "It's like he's trying to drag me back into a nightmare." I frowned, the name Morris ringing ominously in my mind. "Who is Morris?" I asked, needing to understand the threat lurking behind that name. Flora hesitated, biting her lip before answering. "He was a dangerous man," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He used me, exploited my art for his own gain. When I found out, I tried to leave, but he didn't take it well. It was a dark time in my life." Her confession hung heavy in the air, a shadow over the evening's joy. I squeezed her hand reassuringly, offering silent support. "You're not alone now," I reminded her softly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Flora looked at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through the darkness. "Thank you, Bryce," she murmured, "for everything." As the evening wore on, we continued to mingle, but the encounter with John had left a lingering unease. The revelation of Flora's past and the mention of Morris cast a long shadow, hinting at troubles yet to come. Despite the applause and admiration for Flora's work, the night had taken on a different tone, a reminder that some shadows from the past are not easily dispelled, and that the road ahead might be fraught with unforeseen dangers. The days following the exhibition were marked by a disquieting tension, a sense of impending conflict hanging in the air. Flora tried to focus on her art, but the mention of Morris had unsettled her deeply. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege, each creak and shadow hinting at the approach of something sinister. Late one evening, As a cold rain drummed against the windows, Flora and I sat in the drawing room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Flora worked on a new painting, her brush moving in smooth, deliberate strokes, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. I watched her, worried but unsure how to ease the tension. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, its sound sharp and jarring in the quiet house. We exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. I rose to answer it, my heart pounding in my chest. Opening the door, I was met with a tall figure, drenched from the rain. It was Morris, his presence as unsettling as a storm cloud. His eyes, cold and calculating, met mine with a chilling intensity. "May I come in?" he asked, though it was clear he expected no refusal. Before I could respond, Flora appeared beside me, her face pale but resolute. "What do you want, Morris?" she demanded, her voice steely despite the fear I could sense beneath it. Morris smirked, stepping into the foyer. "Flora, always so direct," he drawled, his tone mocking. "I simply came to discuss our unfinished business." I stepped forward, blocking his path. "You have no business here," I stated firmly. "Flora doesn't owe you anything." Morris' eyes flickered with amusement. "Is that so?" he replied, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can protect her? You don't even know what you're dealing with." Flora stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "I've moved on from you, Morris," she declared, her voice strong. "You can't intimidate me anymore." Morris laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Moved on? Is that what you call hiding in this mansion, painting pretty pictures?" He sneered. "You think you can erase the past, Flora? You were always so naive." Flora's eyes blazed with defiance. "I was naive to trust you," she retorted. "But I'm not that person anymore. I'm stronger now, and I won't let you control me." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. I could feel the anger radiating from Flora, a fierce determination to stand her ground. Morris, however, remained calm, his expression unreadable. "You may think you're stronger," Morris said softly, his voice like a serpent's hiss. "But remember, I know you, Flora. I know your weaknesses." Without warning, he lunged forward, his hand reaching for her. Instinctively, I moved to intercept him, my body blocking his path. In the struggle, we stumbled, crashing into a nearby table. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, and Flora screamed, her voice piercing the chaos. "Stop it," she cried, desperation mingled with anger. "Just stop." For a moment, everything froze. Morris stood still, breathing heavily, his eyes locked onto Flora's. I felt a surge of adrenaline, ready to fight if necessary. But then something shifted in Morris' expression. A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed his face, and he stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low. "Have it your way." He turned and walked to the door, his steps echoing in the silence. Before leaving, he paused, looking back at Flora with a strange, unreadable expression. "You'll always be part of my past," he said quietly, "but I won't forget this." With that, he was gone, leaving the door open to the storm outside. The rain poured in, chilling the room and us along with it. I quickly shut the door, turning to Flora. She stood in the center of the room, her eyes wide and haunted. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing to her side. Flora nodded, though she seemed dazed. "It's over," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He's gone." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as the rain continued to beat against the windows. The confrontation had been brief but intense, a culmination of the fear and uncertainty that had hung over us. Morris' departure felt like the lifting of a dark cloud, but I knew the shadow of his presence would linger. As the fire crackled softly, we stood together, drawing strength from each other. The past had resurfaced, bringing with it pain and fear, but it had also shown Flora's courage and resilience. By the end of the next day, the gallery quieted, leaving just the two of us amidst the vibrant array of art. Flora turned to me, her expression softening. "Thank you, Bryce," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It was always you, Flora," I replied, smiling. "You just needed a reminder of how incredible you are." We stood together in comfortable silence, basking in the warmth of our shared triumph. Outside, the sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a perfect backdrop for this new chapter in our lives. The shadows of the past had been dispelled, replaced by the bright promise of a future filled with creativity, friendship, and the simple joys Flora had taught me to cherish. As we walked out into the evening air, the world felt alive with possibility, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right,